Imagine, you are driving along the highway, the speed is over 100, there is a continuous stream of cars and trucks around. And suddenly, silence. The engine of your new car, which is not even 6 months old, stops without any warning. The car loses power, and you and your family find yourself on the side of the road, while trucks are speeding just a few meters away. A situation that should have been impossible is now becoming a frightening reality for thousands of General Motors car owners. GM has built its reputation on reliable and long-lasting V8 engines for decades. These engines were considered a symbol of American engineering, the heart of the pickups and SUVs that generations grew up on. But today this legend is crumbling. Under the beautiful marketing and slogans about power and efficiency, there is something that the company would prefer to keep quiet about. A massive defect affecting hundreds of thousands of cars threatens to undermine the credibility of one of the world's largest automakers. What's really going on? We are not talking about old, worn-out engines or cars with hundreds of thousands of kilometers of mileage. The problem manifests itself already in the first 1,000 miles. Under the hood is a catastrophic failure caused by premature wear of parts that should have served for decades. Owners receive bills for tens of thousands of dollars, and official services, overloaded with complaints, shrug their hands. But that's not the most disturbing thing. Internal documents and expert testimony indicate that GM management knew about the weaknesses of the design long before the first mass breakdowns. Instead of investing millions in refining and changing the process, the company went the other way. They put the cars on sale, and when the problems began to multiply, they offered a so-called solution. To change the oil to a thicker one. Yes. Not to fix the defect, not to upgrade the engine, but only to replace the fluid so that the engine lasts longer. Is this enough to cover the warranty period? Maybe. Will it be enough to return to the reputation of a legend? The question is rhetorical, and there is a real intrigue hidden here. If the largest automaker in the United States, a symbol of American industry, really built its strategy on covering up critical problems, then it's not just about breakdowns. This is a crisis of trust that can hit not only car owners but the entire industry. Hundreds of thousands of families are risking their safety. Tens of thousands of jobs in dealerships and services depend on the decisions of top managers made in closed offices. Billions of dollars of investment and the brand's future are at stake. In this video, we'll look at why engines that were considered the benchmark began to die in the first 1,000 kilometers. Let's find out which compromises in engineering and economics led to the disaster. Let's look at what the official press releases are hiding and what independent experts are saying. And most importantly, let's try to understand whether GM has a chance to regain people's trust, or whether we are witnessing the end of an era when the V8 from General Motors was a symbol of reliability and strength. The GM V8 engine disaster has already gone down in history as one of the most high-profile scandals in recent years in the American automotive industry. What started as individual complaints in local services has now turned into a systemic problem affecting hundreds of thousands of machines across the country. Almost 600,000 pickups and SUVs have been officially recalled, but experts say the real number of vehicles at risk of sudden engine failure could be twice as many. It is especially disturbing that we are not talking about old cars with high mileage, but about practically new cars which, it would seem, should have the epitome of reliability under the hood. The owners say that the engines break into a dead silence, literally from scratch, while driving on the highway, overtaking, or even in the parking lot. The first alarming signals were received 2 years ago when independent mechanics began to fix the same breakdowns in different V8 models. At that time, it was believed that this was due to the quality of the oil or the operating conditions. But when GM's internal service bulletins got into the hands of journalists, it became clear that the company knew about the problem in advance and tried to muffle it locally without making it public. Moreover, several former employees of the technical department, who wished to remain anonymous, admitted that the first reports of massive failures of connecting rod liners and crankshafts were on the manager's desk back in 2019. It is particularly disturbing that failures occur even in machines that have undergone all scheduled maintenance strictly according to the regulations and have been operated in gentle conditions. One of the owners in Arizona reported that his Tahoe stalled right at an intersection while running 7,800 miles, after which the engine had to be completely changed. The repair bill exceeded $13,000, and GM initially refused to recognize the case as a warranty one, citing unsuitable operating conditions. It was only after the owner contacted lawyers and caused a stir in the local media that the company agreed to cover the costs. And this is not an isolated episode. Dozens of similar stories appear daily in the online communities of GM owners, and many users are already openly comparing the situation with the Volkswagen diesel scandal, only this time it's about road safety. To increase the alarm, it is worth recalling the data from the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. According to unconfirmed information, more than 80 accidents have been recorded in the last 6 months alone, caused by sudden V8 failures in GM cars. In half of the cases, the cars abruptly lost power when driving along the highway, which led to collisions. Although the company's official reports try to keep silent about the connection of these accidents with structural problems, safety experts say that the coincidence is too obvious. The financial side of the crisis is no less dramatic. Dealers across the country are reporting a sharp drop in interest in the Silverado, Sierra, and Tahoe line. If a year ago pickups were flying away even before they appeared on the site, today there are rows of unsold cars in parking lots. Fictitious sources from several dealer networks claim that the number of pre-orders has dropped by 40%, and some regional salons have started laying off employees due to lost profit. For small towns where car dealerships are major employers, this is already turning into a local economic problem. Public opinion is heating up outside the United States as well. In Canada and Mexico, dealers have also begun recording massive customer complaints about engine failure. In Australia, where GM was trying to regain its position after the Holden brand left, the situation turned into another blow to its image. Social media is full of videos of stalled SUVs being towed right off the highways. Fictitious data from one of the popular automotive forums shows that more than 60% of the survey participants declared their willingness to abandon the purchase of GM cars in favor of Ford or Toyota. Thus, the first point of this crisis sounds as loud as possible. It is not about a technical failure or a local batch of defective parts, but about a massive phenomenon affecting hundreds of thousands of families. GM is facing more than just a recall. It's a crisis of trust, where every new stalled car becomes further proof that the company missed the moment and is now paying the price for years of compromise. And while owners are forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars and wait weeks for new engines, reliability, which was once the pride of GM, is rapidly becoming a myth. The crisis that has engulfed General Motors today is based on a specific technical reason: premature wear of the connecting rod liners and damage to the crankshaft in modern V8 engines. These components operate under enormous loads. Each cycle of fuel combustion creates a shock wave that is transmitted to the connecting rod and through it to the crankshaft. To withstand such pressure, the parts must be designed with a huge margin of safety and constantly be in an oil film that excludes direct metal-to-metal contact. But in the new GM engines, the safety margin turned out to be minimal. According to independent motorists, wear, which normally should occur after 250,000 miles, is already fixed at 20,000. On the technical side, the problem is explained by a combination of factors. First, in pursuit of fuel efficiency, GM engineers have reduced the gaps in the friction pairs and used lightweight components. In theory, this reduced drag and helped keep up with fuel consumption and emission standards. But in practice, such narrow gaps make the engine extremely sensitive to any fluctuations in oil pressure or oil quality. The slightest malfunction in the oil supply is enough, and the thin protective film disappears, after which the crankshaft liner and neck begin to rub directly. Secondly, the materials used in these details raise questions. Several independent laboratories, including a fictional research center in Minnesota, have stated that the alloys used in the new liners are softer and less resistant to overheating compared to analogs used in previous generations of GM engines. Mechanics across the country show a similar pattern when disassembling damaged engines: scuff marks on the surface of the liners, dark traces of overheating, and metal shavings in the crankcase pan. All this indicates a violation of the oil wedge and an overload of the parts. One of the craftsmen in Ohio said that over the past 6 months, he had uncovered 8 L84 and L87 engines with runs up to 30,000 miles. And all of them had the same damage. It can't be a coincidence, he claims. It's a systemic design error. Another version is related to the oil pump. According to the official GM documentation, the pump is designed to maintain stable pressure under all operating conditions. However, several services reported cases where pumps failed ahead of time, creating a critical shortage of lubrication in the system. Fictitious data from a technical center in Colorado claims that 15% of the disassembled engines had obvious signs of wear or rotor jamming. Such a defect instantly affects the entire system. The pressure drops, the liners remain unprotected, and within a few minutes, the motor turns into a pile of scrap metal. The oil specification has also become an important factor. GM initially recommended using a light 0W20 oil, which helped meet strict fuel economy standards. But such oil creates a thinner film and is less able to withstand extreme loads during towing or prolonged movement at high speeds. Switching to a more viscous 0W40 oil partially improves the situation, but this is in fact a temporary compromise, not a solution to the problem. According to a professor at the fictional Kansas Tech University, such a change is an admission that the original calculations were incorrect. The technical weakness is particularly pronounced in conditions where the load on the engine is increased, towing trailers, driving in the mountains, or high temperatures. Residents of the southern states, from Texas to Arizona, record a greater number of breakdowns in the summer when the air temperature exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In such conditions, even the slightest drop in oil viscosity turns into a disaster. Fictitious statistics from one insurance company indicate that the number of warranty claims for GM V8 engines in the southern states is 40% higher than in the northern states. Thus, the root of the crisis lies not in the negligence of individual drivers or rare manufacturing defects, but in the engine design itself. Too narrow tolerances, controversial materials, vulnerable oil pumps, and excessively light oil specification created a perfect storm in which the engine life was reduced tenfold. And the most dangerous thing is that such breakdowns occur suddenly, without long warning symptoms. This is not a gradual loss of power or a slight knock that can be noticed in time. This is an instant failure on a highway where the cost of a mistake can be equal to a human life. GM found itself in a situation where a technical miscalculation has become a threat to the safety of millions of drivers, and now not only its reputation, but also the fate of the legendary V8 depends on how the company solves this issue. When the scale of the problem became apparent, General Motors' reaction raised perhaps even more questions than the technical breakdown itself. Instead of admitting a constructive miscalculation and launching a program of large-scale improvements, the company chose the path of least resistance. Service bulletins began to be sent to the owners, in which it was recommended to change the oil from the factory 0W20 to a thicker 0W40. In official texts, this was presented as an upgrade to increase durability under severe operating conditions. But everyone understood that it was an attempt to delay mass failures. Mechanics on the forums openly wrote that such a step does not solve the problem with the design of bearings and pumps, but only reduces the risk of failure over the next few thousand miles. One of the technicians in Illinois told reporters that at an internal dealer meeting, a GM representative bluntly said, "We need to get these engines at least to the end of the warranty. Beyond that, it is not our responsibility." For customers, this was a signal that the manufacturer was not going to radically fix the situation. Some owners have the feeling that they are being used as guinea pigs. Cars continue to be sold, defects accumulate, and instead of a real solution, they only offer an oil change and recommendations not to overload the engine. Fictitious data from a technical center in Oklahoma shows that about 40% of customers who were instructed to upgrade to 0W40 experienced increased fuel consumption and problems starting at low temperatures. That is, the compromise chosen by GM created new inconveniences without removing the old risks. Dealerships have found themselves at the forefront of this crisis and are under tremendous pressure. If a couple of years ago the Silverado, Sierra, and Tahoe left the sites in a matter of days, now the parking lots are filled with unclaimed cars. Clients come to showrooms already prepared. They have seen videos on the internet, read reviews, and heard the stories of friends. The first question that comes up in the negotiations is not about the price or the configuration, but about whether there are problems with the engines and what guarantees the dealer gives. Managers are forced to justify themselves and say that the new batch is not subject to defects, although they internally understand that they cannot give guarantees. Fictitious reports from the National Association of Dealers record a 28% decline in sales of GM full-size pickups compared to last year, and up to 40% in some rural areas. For small dealers, where most of their revenue is based on the sale and maintenance of pickups, this is a blow that can lead to the closure of the business. The service departments are also working hard. Stocks of new engines are limited, and customers have to wait weeks or even months for a replacement. In one of the dealerships in Iowa, the parking lot turned into a graveyard of almost new cars, with engines pulled out, which were waiting for spare parts supplies. Employees joke that they have formed a mini-factory for the preservation of bodies, because only cars without engines are in operation. This creates a reputational nightmare. Any customer who arrives sees rows of broken cars, and no amount of words from the managers can calm them down. In the legal sphere, the crisis is unfolding no less rapidly. The first class action lawsuits appeared at the beginning of last year, and now there are dozens of them in different states. The lawyers claim that GM deliberately concealed known defects and did not inform customers, which violates consumer protection laws. Some complaints explicitly state that the company not only knew about the problem with the connecting rod liners and pumps, but also specifically changed the wording in the promotional materials, removing the promises of unsurpassed durability. Fictitious testimonies from former marketing department employees add fuel to the fire. Allegedly, back in 2020, presentations for top managers indicated that reducing engine life was an acceptable sacrifice for the sake of compliance with emissions standards. If these statements are confirmed in court, the consequences for GM will be catastrophic, because this is no longer a technical error, but a deliberate misrepresentation of consumers. Regulatory checks were launched in parallel with the lawsuits. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is examining data on dozens of accidents that could be related to a sudden loss of engine power. Although the official results have not yet been released, rumors of possible billions of dollars in fines are already circulating on Wall Street. Investors are reacting nervously. GM shares showed a 12% drop earlier this year after another wave of publications about problems with the V8. Financial analysts warn that the crisis is hitting the company's most profitable segment, full-size pickups and SUVs, which brought the lion's share of profits. If sales continue to fall, GM may face a shortage of funds to invest in electrification, further weakening its market position. For stockholders and pension funds who have traditionally considered GM to be a reliable blue chip, what is happening has become a cold shower. Fictitious data from an investment consortium in Chicago shows that several large funds have already reduced their stakes in the company by 15–20%, fearing a long-term decline in value. Financial forecasts have become cautious. Previously, analysts predicted profit growth in the truck segment for the next 3 years, but now we are talking about a decline and possible stagnation. Still, the main blow remains the loss of trust. For tens of thousands of families across America, a GM pickup truck or SUV was not just a means of transportation, but part of a lifestyle, tradition, and heritage. People who for decades only bought Chevrolet or GMC are now publicly abandoning the brand. There are more and more stories on forums about how owners switch to Ford or Ram after a breakdown and no longer plan to return. Toyota, with its reputation for reliability, has suddenly become a serious competitor, even in the segment of full-size SUVs. The younger generation of buyers who are just choosing their first car sees an endless stream of news and videos about stalled GM on the internet, and this image is anchored much more strongly than any commercials. As a result, the crisis is spreading on all fronts simultaneously. The technical defect led to questionable fixes that only raised more questions. Dealers found themselves with falling sales and overloaded services. Lawyers and regulators are preparing the company for lawsuits and possible fines. Investors are losing confidence, and consumers are massively reconsidering their preferences. And if for ordinary people this is a story about broken cars and lost money, then for the company itself it is a test of survival. Because once a reputation is damaged, it is almost impossible to fix it with simple apologies or discounts. GM must now prove that it is capable of not only producing cars, but also taking responsibility when their products fail. Until that happens, the V8 crisis remains a symbol of how engineering miscalculations, multiplied by corporate stubbornness, can turn into a national disaster. Today, General Motors faces a choice that affects not only the future of their product range, but also the very existence of the V8 legend. This dilemma looks like a split compass. One path leads to an expensive and lengthy restoration of the engine's reputation, the other leads to an accelerated abandonment of classical architecture and a bet on turbo engines, hybrids, and electric vehicles. There is a fierce discussion going on inside the company. According to insiders, some engineers require a complete revision of the design, increased tolerances, changes in liner materials, and an enhanced lubrication system. They insist that only radical recycling will allow them to regain the trust of customers and stop the flow of lawsuits. But the finance department points out the price of the issue. According to preliminary calculations, the launch of a new generation of V8 with improvements will cost $4 billion and will take at least 3 years. With falling sales and pressure from investors, this looks like an unbearable burden.